The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as 9-year-old Princess Charlotte walked quietly beside her governess, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. The young princess had always been known for her spirited nature, much like her late grandmother Princess Diana, but today she seemed unusually subdued. Her small hands clutched a handwritten letter that had arrived with the morning post, addressed specifically to her in elegant script. Charlotte had been struggling with the weight of royal expectations lately. The constant scrutiny, the endless lessons in protocol, and the pressure to be perfect at every public appearance had begun to take their toll on the young girl. Unlike her older brother Prince George, who seemed to naturally embrace his future role as heir, Charlotte often felt trapped between wanting to be a normal child and fulfilling her duty as a member of the royal family. The letter in her hands was from a young girl named Sophie, the same age as Charlotte, who was battling cancer at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Sophie had written about her dreams of meeting a real princess and how Charlotte's smile during a recent charity visit had given her hope during her darkest days. The letter was filled with innocent questions about palace life and whether princesses ever felt scared or lonely. As Charlotte read those words, tears had welled up in her eyes because she understood exactly what Sophie meant about feeling scared and lonely. Mrs. Hayes noticed Charlotte's quiet demeanor as they made their way toward the palace library for her afternoon literature lesson. The governess had been with the family for 3 years and had grown particularly fond of Charlotte's inquisitive nature and genuine compassion for others. She could see that something was troubling the young princess deeply. "Your Highness," Mrs. Hayes said gently, "you seem quite thoughtful today. Is everything all right?" Charlotte looked up at her governess with those piercing blue eyes that reminded everyone of her father. "Mrs. Hayes, do you think it's wrong to want to help people even if it might upset other members of the family?" The question caught Mrs. Hayes off guard. She had heard whispers among the staff about growing tensions within the royal household, particularly regarding the direction of Charlotte's education and public role. Queen Camilla had been increasingly vocal about her concerns over Charlotte's informal interactions with the public during official engagements, believing that such behavior was unbecoming of royal protocol. "What do you mean, dear?" Mrs. Hayes asked, settling down on one of the garden benches. Charlotte sat beside her, still clutching Sophie's letter. "I received this letter today from a girl who's very sick. She wants to meet me, but I know that arranging private meetings isn't something that's usually done. Queen Camilla has told me many times that we must maintain proper distance from the public to preserve the dignity of the crown." Mrs. Hayes felt her heart ache for the young princess. She had witnessed several uncomfortable exchanges between Queen Camilla and Charlotte over the past few months. The queen consort seemed determined to mold Charlotte into her vision of what a royal princess should be, which often clashed with the young girl's natural empathy and desire to connect with people on a personal level. "Your Highness," Mrs. Hayes said carefully, "your compassion is one of your greatest strengths. Your grandmother Princess Diana was beloved precisely because she showed genuine care for others, especially those who were suffering." Charlotte's eyes brightened slightly at the mention of her grandmother. She had been told many stories about Princess Diana's charitable work and her ability to make people feel seen and valued. "Do you think Grandmama would have wanted to help Sophie?" "I believe she would have moved heaven and earth to bring comfort to that child," Mrs. Hayes replied without hesitation. As they continued their conversation, neither noticed the figure watching them from an upper window of the palace. Queen Camilla stood in her private sitting room, observing the interaction below with growing concern. She had been increasingly worried about what she perceived as Charlotte's tendency toward emotional decision-making, something she believed could be detrimental to the future stability of the monarchy. Queen Camilla had spent decades learning to navigate the complex world of royal duty and protocol. She understood better than most the importance of maintaining boundaries and the dangers of allowing personal emotions to override institutional obligations. In her view, Charlotte's compassionate nature, while admirable in a private citizen, could become a liability in her royal role if not properly managed. The Queen Consort had been planning to address these concerns directly with Princess Catherine and Prince William, but recent events had convinced her that more immediate intervention might be necessary. Just last week, Charlotte had broken protocol during a hospital visit by sitting on the floor to play games with young patients, an action that had generated positive media coverage but had also prompted criticism from traditionalist royal commentators. As Queen Camilla watched Charlotte and her governess in the garden, she made a decision that would set in motion a series of events that none of them could have anticipated. She would need to have a frank conversation with Charlotte about the responsibilities that came with her position, even if such a conversation might be difficult for a 9-year-old to understand. Meanwhile, in the garden below, Charlotte had made her own decision. She carefully folded Sophie's letter and placed it in the pocket of her dress. "Mrs. Hayes, I want to visit Sophie at the hospital. Not as part of an official engagement, but just as Charlotte. Could you help me arrange this?" Mrs. Hayes felt a mixture of pride and concern. She admired Charlotte's determination to help, but she also understood the potential complications such an unofficial visit could create. "Your Highness, that's a beautiful gesture, but we would need to speak with your parents about this. There are security considerations and protocols that must be followed." "I understand," Charlotte said, standing up from the bench with renewed determination. "But I also understand that sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. Sophie is scared and alone, just like I sometimes feel. If I can help her feel less alone, then isn't that worth whatever trouble it might cause?" The wisdom in those words, coming from such a young person, brought tears to Mrs. Hayes's eyes. She realized that she was witnessing the emergence of a truly remarkable young woman who would not be easily molded to fit anyone else's expectations, not even those of the Queen Consort. As they walked back toward the palace, both Charlotte and Mrs. Hayes were unaware that their conversation had been partially overheard by a member of the palace staff who was loyal to Queen Camilla. Within hours, word of Charlotte's plans would reach the Queen Consort, setting the stage for a confrontation that would challenge both the young princess's resolve and the established order of the royal household. That evening, as Charlotte lay in her bed reading another letter from Sophie that had arrived in the afternoon post, she felt a growing sense of purpose. Sophie had written about her upcoming surgery and how frightened she was. The little girl had specifically asked if Charlotte might be able to visit before the operation, saying that meeting a real princess would give her the courage she needed to be brave. Charlotte closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother Diana's famous quote about wanting to be the queen of people's hearts. For the first time in months, she felt like she understood what that really meant. It wasn't about grand gestures or public appearances, it was about recognizing the humanity in others and responding to their needs with genuine compassion. Little did she know that across the palace, Queen Camilla was preparing for what she believed would be a necessary lesson in royal duty, one that would teach Charlotte the importance of putting institutional obligations before personal desires. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not only Charlotte's resolve but also the very foundations of what it meant to be a modern member of the British royal family. The next morning would bring challenges that neither the young princess nor the Queen Consort could fully anticipate, and the loyal guards who had sworn to protect the royal family would find themselves facing a situation that no amount of training had prepared them for. The following morning brought an unexpected change to Charlotte's usual routine. Instead of her regular lessons with Mrs. Hayes, she was summoned to Queen Camilla's private sitting room at precisely 10 o'clock. The summons came through Charlotte's personal protection officer, Inspector James Morrison, who delivered the message with an unusual formality that immediately put the young princess on edge. Charlotte had always found Queen Camilla's sitting room intimidating. The space was decorated in rich burgundy and gold tones, with heavy curtains that blocked much of the natural light. Portraits of previous queens looked down from the walls, their stern expressions seeming to judge anyone who entered. The room felt like a place where serious conversations happened, not the kind of warm, comfortable space where a child might feel at ease. Queen Camilla was seated behind her mahogany desk when Charlotte knocked softly on the door. She looked up from the papers she had been reviewing, her expression carefully neutral. "Come in, Charlotte. Please, take a seat." Charlotte walked slowly across the thick carpet and settled into the chair across from the desk. Her hands instinctively went to the pocket of her dress where she still carried Sophie's letters. The action didn't go unnoticed by Queen Camilla, who had been briefed about the correspondence by her private secretary. "I understand you received some letters yesterday," Queen Camilla began, her voice measured and careful. "From a young patient at Great Ormond Street Hospital." Charlotte nodded, feeling her heart rate increase. She had hoped to speak with her parents first about visiting Sophie, but it seemed that news of her intentions had already reached Queen Camilla through other channels. "Your Highness," Queen Camilla continued, using Charlotte's formal title in a way that created distance between them, I want to discuss with you the importance of understanding boundaries in your role as a member of this family." The formality of the address stung Charlotte more than she expected. In private family settings, Queen Camilla usually called her by her first name, but the use of her title made this conversation feel like an official reprimand rather than a family discussion. "I understand that you have a kind heart," Queen Camilla said, "and that quality will serve you well in your future royal duties. However, kindness must always be balanced with wisdom and an understanding of proper protocol. We cannot allow our personal emotions to override our institutional obligations." Charlotte felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and growing anger. "But, Queen Camilla, Sophie is just a little girl who's scared about her surgery. She's the same age as me, and she's all alone in the hospital. Surely helping her wouldn't hurt anyone." Queen Camilla's expression hardened slightly. She had anticipated this kind of emotional reasoning from Charlotte, and it only confirmed her belief that the young princess needed firmer guidance. "Charlotte, what you're suggesting is exactly the kind of thinking that can lead to problems for our family and the institution we represent." The queen consort stood up and walked around the desk, positioning herself in a way that made Charlotte feel even smaller in her chair. "When we make exceptions for one person, no matter how deserving they might seem, we create expectations that we cannot possibly meet for everyone. Do you understand how many sick children write to members of the royal family every single day?" Charlotte looked up at Queen Camilla with eyes that were beginning to fill with tears, but her voice remained steady. "I understand that we can't help everyone, but doesn't that make it even more important to help when we can? Sophie isn't asking for money or special treatment. She just wants to meet someone who might understand what it's like to feel different and alone." The wisdom in Charlotte's words struck Queen Camilla unexpectedly, but she pushed aside any doubts about her approach. She had seen too many members of the royal family make costly mistakes by allowing their hearts to rule their heads, and she was determined not to let Charlotte follow that same path. "Charlotte, I'm going to be very clear with you," Queen Camilla said, her voice taking on an edge that the young princess had never heard before. "You will not be arranging any unofficial visits to this hospital or any other. You will not be responding personally to these letters beyond the standard acknowledgement that will be sent by your office. And you will learn to understand that being royal means making difficult choices that ordinary people don't have to make." The harshness of the ultimatum shocked Charlotte into silence. She had expected Queen Camilla to express concerns, but she hadn't anticipated such a complete dismissal of Sophie's situation. The young princess felt tears beginning to flow down her cheeks, but she refused to look away from Queen Camilla's stern gaze. "But what about what Grandmama Diana would have done?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone always says she cared about people who were suffering." The mention of Princess Diana struck a nerve with Queen Camilla that she hadn't expected. The comparison was one that had haunted her throughout her years in the royal family, and hearing it from Charlotte felt like a particularly sharp blow. "Your grandmother," Queen Camilla said, her voice growing colder, "made choices that created enormous difficulties for this family. Some of her actions, however, well-intentioned, caused more harm than good. I will not allow you to repeat those mistakes." The criticism of her beloved grandmother was more than Charlotte could bear. She stood up abruptly from her chair, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You're wrong about Grandmama," she said, her voice stronger than anyone in the room had expected. "She helped people because it was the right thing to do, not because it was easy or convenient." Queen Camilla was taken aback by the fire in Charlotte's response. She had expected the young princess to accept the rebuke quietly, as most children would when confronted by an adult authority figure. Instead, she was seeing a glimpse of the strong-willed determination that seemed to run in the Spencer family bloodline. "Charlotte, you will sit down and listen to me," Queen Camilla commanded, her own temper beginning to flare. "I am trying to teach you important lessons about duty and responsibility. Your emotional attachment to this situation is clouding your judgment." But Charlotte remained standing, her blue eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded Queen Camilla uncomfortably of both Princess Diana and Prince William when they were determined about something. "My judgment isn't clouded," Charlotte said with surprising maturity. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Sophie needs help, and I have the ability to help her. If that's not what being royal should be about, then maybe being royal is wrong." The boldness of the statement sent shockwaves through the room. Queen Camilla felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under the pressure of Charlotte's unexpected defiance. She had anticipated having to deal with teenage rebellion eventually, but she hadn't expected such articulate resistance from a 9-year-old. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Queen Camilla said, her voice rising for the first time during the conversation. "I am the queen consort, and you will show me the respect that position demands." Charlotte felt her own anger rising to match Queen Camilla's. "Respect has to be earned," she said, echoing something she had heard her father say during a heated phone conversation about royal duties. "And telling me I can't help a sick child because it might be inconvenient doesn't earn my respect." The confrontation was escalating beyond anything either of them had anticipated. Queen Camilla realized that her usual methods of dealing with royal family disagreements were completely ineffective with Charlotte, who seemed immune to both authority and intimidation. Outside the sitting room, Inspector Morrison and 2 other protection officers were becoming increasingly aware that the conversation inside was growing heated. The raised voices were audible through the heavy door, and the security team exchanged concerned glances. Their training had prepared them for external threats to the royal family, but internal conflicts presented a different kind of challenge entirely. Inspector Morrison made a decision that would prove crucial to the events that followed. He quietly radioed for additional backup while simultaneously sending a discreet message to Prince William's private secretary. Whatever was happening in that room, it was clear that the situation was spiraling beyond a simple family disagreement. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hayes had arrived for Charlotte's postponed literature lesson, only to be informed by palace staff that the young princess was in a meeting with Queen Camilla. The governess felt a growing sense of unease as she realized that their conversation in the garden the previous day had likely triggered this confrontation. As the voices from the sitting room grew even louder, Mrs. Hayes made her own decision to wait nearby, sensing that Charlotte might need a friendly face when the meeting concluded. She positioned herself in an alcove where she could see the door to Queen Camilla's sitting room while remaining out of direct sight. Inside the room, the confrontation had reached a breaking point. Queen Camilla, frustrated by her inability to make Charlotte comply with her wishes, was about to make a decision that would cross a line she had never crossed before. Charlotte, meanwhile, was preparing to do something that would shock everyone involved and force the royal protection officers into uncharted territory. The moment that would change everything happened so quickly that neither Charlotte nor Queen Camilla fully realized what was occurring until it was too late to take it back. Queen Camilla, driven by frustration and a determination to assert her authority, reached across the space between them and grasped Charlotte firmly by the shoulders. "You will listen to me, young lady," Queen Camilla said through gritted teeth, her fingers pressing into Charlotte's small shoulders with more force than she had intended. "I will not tolerate this kind of disrespectful behavior from you or anyone else in this family." The physical contact was something that crossed every boundary of appropriate interaction between adults and children in the royal household. Charlotte, who had never experienced anything like this aggressive handling, felt a shock of fear mixed with outrage course through her small body. "Let go of me," Charlotte said, her voice carrying a note of panic that she tried desperately to control. "You're hurting me." But Queen Camilla was beyond hearing reason at that moment. Months of pent-up frustration about what she perceived as Charlotte's undisciplined behavior, combined with the stress of trying to modernize the monarchy while maintaining its traditions, had finally reached a breaking point. "You need to understand that your feelings don't matter more than the stability of this institution," Queen Camilla continued, her grip tightening as Charlotte tried to pull away. "Your grandmother's emotional decisions nearly destroyed this family, and I will not allow you to follow in her footsteps." Charlotte felt something inside her snap at the renewed attack on Princess Diana's memory. With a strength that surprised both of them, she wrenched herself free from Queen Camilla's grasp and stumbled backward toward the door. "Don't you ever touch me again," Charlotte said, her voice carrying a quality of command that seemed far beyond her 9 years. "And don't you ever speak about my grandmother that way. She was worth 10 of you." The insult hung in the air between them like a physical blow. Queen Camilla felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Without thinking clearly about the consequences, she stepped forward and delivered a sharp slap across Charlotte's cheek. The sound of the slap echoed through the heavy sitting room like a gunshot. Charlotte's hand flew to her reddening cheek, her blue eyes wide with shock and pain. For a moment, both of them stood frozen, equally stunned by what had just occurred. Outside the door, Inspector Morrison heard the unmistakable sound and felt his blood run cold. His training kicked in immediately, overriding any concerns about protocol or royal hierarchy. The sound he had just heard represented a potential threat to a member of the royal family under his protection, and his duty was clear. Morrison burst through the door without knocking, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio to call for immediate backup. What he saw inside the sitting room confirmed his worst fears. Princess Charlotte stood near the door with tears streaming down her face and a red mark clearly visible on her left cheek. Queen Camilla stood several feet away, her own face flushed and her hands still raised from the blow she had delivered. "Your Majesty," Morrison said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of high-stakes security work, "I need you to step away from Princess Charlotte immediately." Queen Camilla seemed to snap back to reality at the sight of the protection officer. The enormity of what she had just done began to sink in as she realized that there had been a witness to her loss of control. "Inspector Morrison, this is a private family matter," Queen Camilla said, trying to regain her composure and authority. "Your intervention is neither necessary nor appropriate." But Morrison had been trained to recognize threats to royal family members regardless of their source, and what he had witnessed clearly fell into that category. "Ma'am, with respect, my duty is to protect Princess Charlotte from all potential harm. I observed evidence of physical contact that appears to have caused distress and injury." Charlotte, still holding her stinging cheek, looked up at Inspector Morrison with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She had never expected to need protection from a member of her own family, and the reality of the situation was almost too overwhelming to process. "Inspector Morrison is right," Charlotte said, her voice still shaky but determined. "Queen Camilla hit me because I wouldn't agree to ignore a sick little girl who needs help." The simple, honest explanation of events hit Queen Camilla like another slap. Hearing her actions described so plainly by a 9-year-old made the severity of her behavior impossible to deny or rationalize away. Morrison keyed his radio and spoke in the coded language that royal protection officers used for sensitive situations. "Control, this is Morrison. I need immediate response from the senior team to Queen Camilla's sitting room. We have a Code 7 situation requiring immediate supervisor intervention." Within minutes, the sitting room was filled with additional security personnel, including Chief Inspector Sarah Williams, the head of Royal Protection Services. Williams was a veteran officer who had served the royal family for over 15 years, and she had never encountered a situation quite like this one. "Inspector Morrison, report," Williams said tersely as she assessed the scene before her. Morrison spoke with professional clarity, describing exactly what he had observed while maintaining the respectful tone required when dealing with royal family members. "Ma'am, I heard what sounded like physical contact from outside the room. Upon entry, I observed Princess Charlotte with visible marks on her face and signs of distress. The princess indicated that she had been struck by Queen Camilla during a disagreement." Williams felt her stomach drop as she absorbed the implications of Morrison's report. The situation represented an unprecedented challenge for Royal Protection Services. Their protocols covered external threats, medical emergencies, and security breaches, but they had no established procedures for protecting one royal family member from another. "Your Majesty," Williams addressed Queen Camilla with careful formality, "I'm going to need to ask you to remain in this room while we sort out the appropriate response to this incident. Princess Charlotte, I'd like to escort you to the medical officer for an examination." Queen Camilla felt her world beginning to crumble around her. "Chief Inspector Williams, surely you cannot be serious about treating this as some kind of criminal matter. This was a family disagreement that got slightly out of hand." "Ma'am," Williams replied with professional neutrality, "any physical contact that results in visible marks on a member of the royal family, particularly a minor, must be thoroughly documented and reported through appropriate channels. This is protocol regardless of who is involved." Charlotte looked around the room at all the serious faces focused on her situation. She felt overwhelmed by the attention and the realization that her confrontation with Queen Camilla had spiraled into something much larger than either of them had anticipated. "I just wanted to help Sophie," Charlotte said, her voice small and confused. "I don't understand why that was so wrong that it led to all this." Mrs. Hayes, who had been allowed into the room by the security team, immediately went to Charlotte's side. The governess felt her heart break as she saw the red mark on the young princess's face and the confusion in her eyes. "Your Highness," Mrs. Hayes said gently, "you did nothing wrong by wanting to help another child. Nothing that happened here was your fault." The reassurance from her trusted governess seemed to give Charlotte some strength back. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Chief Inspector Williams. "I want to call my father," Charlotte said with quiet dignity. "I think he needs to know what happened here today." Williams nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what we're going to do, Your Highness. In fact, both your parents are already being contacted and are on their way here." Queen Camilla realized that there would be no containing this incident. Prince William and Princess Catherine would soon know exactly what had transpired, and the consequences would likely extend far beyond a simple family argument. Outside the palace walls, word of the unusual security activity was already beginning to spread among the staff. Whispered conversations in hallways speculated about what kind of emergency could have triggered such a significant response from the protection team. As they waited for Charlotte's parents to arrive, the young princess made a decision that would ultimately define how this crisis would be resolved. Despite everything that had happened, she found herself thinking not about revenge or punishment, but about Sophie lying in her hospital bed, still waiting for someone to care enough to visit. "Inspector Williams," Charlotte said, surprising everyone with her composure, "after my parents get here and we sort all this out, I still want to visit Sophie at the hospital. What happened today doesn't change the fact that she needs help." The statement demonstrated a maturity and focus on others that impressed every adult in the room, including Queen Camilla, who was beginning to understand that she had seriously misjudged the character of the young princess she had tried to control. Prince William arrived at Kensington Palace within 20 minutes of receiving the emergency call from Chief Inspector Williams. His face was pale with concern and barely controlled anger as he strode through the corridors toward Queen Camilla's sitting room, accompanied by his private secretary and additional security personnel. Princess Catherine arrived moments later, having cancelled a charity engagement the instant she received word that Charlotte had been involved in some kind of incident requiring medical attention. Both parents had been given only the basic facts over the phone, but the serious tone of Chief Inspector Williams had made it clear that this was no ordinary childhood mishap. When Prince William entered the sitting room and saw his daughter with a visible red mark on her cheek, standing beside the palace medical officer who was documenting her injuries, something inside him shifted in a way that reminded everyone present why he was considered one of the most protective fathers in the royal family. "What exactly happened here?" Prince William asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made even the seasoned security officers take notice. Chief Inspector Williams stepped forward to provide a professional briefing. "Your Royal Highness, based on Inspector Morrison's direct observation and Princess Charlotte's account, there was an altercation between Princess Charlotte and Queen Camilla that resulted in physical contact. The medical officer has documented minor injuries consistent with a slap to the face." Prince William turned to look at Queen Camilla, who had remained seated behind her desk throughout the entire crisis. The Queen Consort looked older than he had ever seen her, her usual composure completely shattered by the events of the morning. "Is this accurate?" Prince William asked Queen Camilla directly. Queen Camilla met his gaze with difficulty, knowing that any attempt to minimize or explain away her actions would only make the situation worse. "Yes," she said quietly. "I lost my temper during our disagreement, and I struck Charlotte. There is no excuse for my behavior." Princess Catherine, who had been kneeling beside Charlotte and examining her daughter's face with gentle maternal concern, stood up slowly. Her expression was unlike anything the palace staff had ever seen from the usually diplomatic and composed Princess of Wales. "You hit my 9-year-old daughter," Catherine said, her voice vibrating with controlled fury. "You put your hands on my child because she wanted to help a sick little girl." The raw emotion in Catherine's voice seemed to affect Queen Camilla more than all the formal security protocols and documentation. For the first time since the incident began, tears appeared in the Queen Consort's eyes. "Catherine, I am deeply sorry," Queen Camilla began, but Catherine held up her hand to stop her. "No," Catherine said firmly. "You don't get to apologize to me and make this go away. You need to apologize to Charlotte, and then, you need to explain to my husband and me how you thought it was acceptable to physically assault our daughter." Prince William placed a protective hand on Charlotte's shoulder and addressed Chief Inspector Williams.
"What are our options here in terms of ensuring this never happens again?"
Williams had been dreading this question because the answer would likely create a constitutional crisis unlike anything the modern royal family had ever faced. "Your Royal Highness, technically this incident constitutes assault of a minor. If this had occurred outside the royal household, charges would likely be filed. However, given the unique circumstances, we're in uncharted territory." Charlotte, who had been listening quietly to the adult conversation swirling around her, suddenly spoke up with a clarity that surprised everyone in the room. "I don't want Queen Camilla to go to jail or anything like that," she said, looking directly at her father. "But I do want her to understand that what she did was wrong, and I want to make sure she can't stop me from helping Sophie." The wisdom and forgiveness in Charlotte's response left the adults speechless. Despite being the victim of the incident, the young princess was more concerned about moving forward constructively than about punishment or revenge. Prince William knelt down to his daughter's eye level. "Charlotte, what Queen Camilla did to you was completely unacceptable, regardless of what your disagreement was about. No adult should ever put their hands on you in anger, especially not a member of our own family."
Charlotte nodded solemnly. "I know, Papa.
But I also know that people sometimes make terrible mistakes when they're scared or angry.
Maybe Queen Camilla was scared that I was going to embarrass the family by caring too much about other people." The perceptiveness of Charlotte's analysis struck everyone in the room. Even in her pain and confusion, the young princess had managed to identify the underlying fears that had driven Queen Camilla to such extreme behavior. Queen Camilla finally spoke, her voice heavy with remorse. "Charlotte, you're absolutely right.
I was scared, but that doesn't excuse what I did. I hate you because I couldn't control you the way I thought I needed to, and that was wrong in every possible way." Princess Catherine studied Queen Camilla's expression, trying to determine whether the remorse was genuine or simply calculated to minimize the consequences. "This isn't just about an apology," Catherine said.
"This is about a fundamental disagreement about what kind of person we want Charlotte to become."
Prince William stood up and faced Queen Camilla directly. "From this point forward, you will have no direct authority over Charlotte's education, public engagements, or personal decisions. Any concerns you have about her behavior will be addressed through Catherine and me, not through direct confrontation with our daughter." The decree effectively removed Queen Camilla from any significant role in Charlotte's upbringing, a consequence that went far beyond the immediate incident.
It represented a fundamental shift in the power dynamics within the royal family.
Furthermore, Prince William continued, "Charlotte will be visiting Sophie at Great Ormond Street Hospital as soon as the arrangements can be made safely. This will not be an official royal engagement, but rather a personal visit from one child to another."
Queen Camilla felt the full weight of her actions settling upon her.
Not only had she damaged her relationship with Charlotte, but she had also undermined her position within the broader royal family. The incident would likely have repercussions that extended far beyond this single day. Charlotte walked over to where Queen Camilla was sitting and looked up at her with eyes that held both hurt and compassion.
"Queen Camilla, I forgive you for hitting me, but I need you to promise me something." Queen Camilla looked down at the small girl she had so grievously wronged.
"What is it, Charlotte?" "I need you to promise that you'll try to remember what it felt like to be a little girl who just wanted to help someone," Charlotte said.
"Because that's all I was trying to do.
I wasn't trying to hurt the monarchy or embarrass our family. I was just trying to help Sophie feel less scared." The simple request broke something inside Queen Camilla that had been hardening for years. She realized that in her determination to protect the institution of the monarchy, she had lost sight of the human values that made the institution worth protecting in the first place. "I promise, Charlotte," Queen Camilla said, reaching out tentatively to touch the young girl's hand. "And I promise that I will never raise my hand to you or anyone else again, no matter how frustrated I become." Charlotte squeezed Queen Camilla's hand briefly before stepping back to stand between her parents. "Then, maybe something good can come from this terrible day after all." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the palace medical officer, approached Prince William with her report. Your Royal Highness, Princess Charlotte has minor facial bruising that should heal completely within a week. There are no signs of serious injury, but I would recommend follow-up monitoring for any signs of emotional trauma.
Prince William nodded grimly. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Please prepare a complete report for our records.
As the immediate crisis began to wind down, Mrs. Hayes approached Charlotte with a gentle smile.
Your Highness, would you like to help me draft a letter to Sophie? We could let her know that you'll be visiting soon and ask what kinds of things she might enjoy doing together.
Charlotte's face lit up for the first time since the incident began. Yes, please. I want to tell her that sometimes the best things happen after the worst days. Princess Catherine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, marveling at the resilience and wisdom her child had demonstrated throughout this ordeal. I think that might be the most grown-up thing anyone has said today. As the various officials began to file out of the sitting room, Queen Camilla remained alone with her thoughts and the magnitude of what she had done.